She wakes to her phone, lighting the dark like a small, accusing moon. The screen reads incoming, home, and before she can swipe, a voice through the speaker says her full name. As if it were standing in the room, the air tastes of dust and cold metal. Every hair on her arms pricks awake, and for a suspended second, the apartment feels like the throat of a thing holding its breath. Listening closer than any neighbor's knock tonight, before we go any further, I ask you a favor. Like the video, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment below this video. With the time you listened to this story, Mara had seen the meme an hour earlier, a blurred screenshot of a group chat, and a caption that kept folding into itself, "Do not answer if it knows your name." She laughed at it then, the kind of laugh that lives on the edge of late-night exhaustion, too tired to be alarmed, too awake to ignore curiosity. She pictured drunk roommates, a college prank, an audio clip someone had warped for cheap terror. She pocketed her phone, let the screen sleep against her thigh, and made coffee. When she came back to the kitchen, the phone was a pale coin on the counter, the glow making the tile gleam like ceramic moonlight. She left it there. Appliances hummed, the kettle cooling, the refrigerator's steady throb, a domestic chorus that meant nothing in the middle of the night. Outside, the city sighed and signed itself off. The building's hallway light clicked at 2 and went mute. Inside, Mara moved like a tired animal through bare rooms, gathering dishes, stacking mail, watching the minutes peel away. Then the phone buzzed, faint, a small pinprick of light in the dim. Mara froze with a tea towel in her hand, linen caught in her fingers like a thin trap. The screen read her number, incoming, home. She blinked. The pattern of the world slipped for a half beat. Incoming might be a contact name, but home was not anyone she knew. Her thumb hovered. She told herself it would be telemarketing, a wrong number, maybe a mislabel from an app. She told herself to ignore it. The voice came before she could swipe. It was a laugh at first, her mother's laugh, or something pretending to be it. Low and distant, with the reverberant hollowness of a voice recorded through a pipe. There was static threaded through the sound, like wind through a fissure. Then the laugh flattened into a name. Mara, it said, and the syllables were coded in something cold. It was her name reduced to a thing the air could hold. Her scalp tightened, muscles tuning. The kettle's hum sounded suddenly foreign and very loud. She shouldered back into the doorway to peer at the hallway, as if someone could be standing just beyond the threshold and belong there. The hall was a rectangle of dim paint and a shadowed mail slot. No footsteps, no breath. She picked up the phone because she wanted to prove the obvious. "Hello," she said, her voice brittle, the line filled with the same low laugh and a hiss like a radiator. The laugh made her mouth ache. The call disconnected with a soft click before anyone could speak. Her hand shook when she set the phone down. She told herself to laugh again. She told herself to be annoyed. She told herself to call the number back. The call log showed her own number calling from within the apartment. little webhook of a number, with its digits curling back on themselves. She scrolled until her finger felt stupid and hairline faint. There was no trace of an outside line. There was only the incoming miss that felt like a footprint messages bloomed on her screen, screenshots from friends. The meme mutating. Do not answer if it knows your name, pasted over sun-faded images of dorm rooms. A classmate from sophomore year posted a black and white photo and a single comment. It's doing rounds. Someone else wrote local prank. Lol, with 30 laughing emojis. The group chat made a train of jokes, but the laughter on the phone had been wrong in the places she recognized. It had imitated her mother, but had the geography of plumbing. It had sounded like something sliding along ductwork. Mara dug into the settings, toggling microphones, disconnecting devices like a surgeon, isolating a symptom. She called her mother's number and heard the calm shuffle of television from the other end, a human voice, ordinary, safe. Her mother was asleep, visiting a friend in another state. She said, when Mara stumbled through questions. The laugh on the line had not come from her. She paced, counting, tapping the tiles, as if each one could confirm the rationality of her step. She tried to tell a story that fit. Someone had spoofed the number. A prankster with access to voice modulators and a hunger for reaction. The internet did this. People lived on attention. That explanation warmed itself under her skin like a temporary bandage. She wanted it to be true. The building was old and thin-walled. Radios traveled through pipes and cables. The first-floor neighbor had a habit of late-night phone calls that turned into muttered monologues. Maybe the soundscape of pipes and vents had been the conduit. Maybe the laugh had simply been a borrowed sound that caught and warped. She imagined a college student 2 floors down playing with an app and finding perverse fun. The fantasy was small and human, and crucially, explainable. She left a terse message in the class group. Weird call. Anyone else? Replies rolled in like slack tide. One friend said their grandmother's smart speaker had answered and whispered a name, but that was in a suburb 3 towns over. Another said their cousin's baby monitor had started echoing Maya until the battery died. The misspellings multiplied. Somewhere between laughing and worrying, the joke had become a contagion. Night bled toward 4 a.m. Mara's apartment seemed to shrink and sit on her like a lid. She layered on a sweater and forced herself to move with purpose, not to brood. The idea of someone outside her door with a voice that knew the way dust pooled on her bookshelf was a story from horror films, satisfying, marketable. She wanted to be the sensible protagonist who called the police and filed a report and then went back to bed. She wanted to be the person who could name fear and close it neatly with paperwork. She didn't call the police. She told herself there was no evidence yet. She told herself a report would be embarrassing if it was nothing. She imagined the officer's pity and the neighbor's eyebrows. Better to wait. Better to watch. She set 2 cameras to record. The cheap hallway cam and the one she kept for package theft, and left them rolling toward the door. She repositioned a microwave with a book to catch glare, made the frame look accidental. When the phone rang again, the display read her number like an accusation. The sound through the speaker this time was closer to human, fuller, bored almost, as if the voice had practiced being ordinary. "Mara," it said, softer, as if testing the shape of her name against a tongue that didn't mean it. There was a wetness under the syllables, a sound like someone breathing with a mouth that tasted of metal. The hiss of static undercut the vowels. Mara's hand hovered over the answer screen. She considered letting it ring. She considered doing nothing at all and proving that silence starved whatever had called. Instead, she tapped accept because she wanted to hold the thread of rationality. She wanted to hear nothing and then hang up and file a rational report. The voice didn't raise to speak. It let the pause lengthen until the air before it had weight. Then it parted into laughter. The next morning, Mara woke to the house, answering one name after another. It started small, a single vibration on the counter that felt like a bee trapped against skin, and then multiplied. Her phone bloomed with the last call, caller ID reading her own number as if a mirror had learned to ring. The baby monitor in the spare room answered with a thin, metallic syllable that scraped the inside of her skull. Her smart speaker, which lived on a hack shelf next to a ceramic cactus she never watered, replied in a flat announcer's cadence, clipped and patient, the vowel like a hand running along cold metal. Even the old answering machine in the hall, the one with the yellowed tape and the dent where she dropped it once, harumphed out a slow, wet click, and then her name in the grainy, magnetic voice of recorded memory. Each device had its own texture. On the router, the syllable was tinny and high. Like coins wrenched from a fountain. On the microwave, it came as a low, hollow bell. It crawled along the baseboards and pooled under the refrigerator in a frequency she could feel in her molars. She moved through rooms like a cautious animal, palm hovering over light switches, flinching at the way the shadows seemed to bend toward the sounds. Her mother would have called it superstition. Her father would have called it a wiring fault. Mara called it by its simplest name, wrong, and opened cameras. She tapped the security app and watched the living room feed, expecting to find an intruder caught like a bad habit under the wide-angle lens. The frame held only regular things: the couch, the coffee table with a ring of cold coffee on it, the dead fern by the window. Then, half a minute later, the motion light along the hallway shivered and the camera pinged. Incoming call, home, 214 M. Mara rewound the feed to 2 minutes before the ping. The video scrubbed backward in a jerky rhythm. She watched the space by the hallway, watched for a silhouette, for footsteps, for anything. Nothing moved. She scrubbed forward to the frame when the camera had pinged. A single pixel shimmered near the floor for a blink, like heat above a grate, and the timestamp flicked from 213 214. She paused the footage and zoomed. The pixel was a nothing, a smear of light. But when she stepped back, the room felt suddenly occupied. She checked the camera history. There were logs she hadn't seen before, calls logged by the security system as incoming from internal or house, with durations and audio clips. She clicked one, and a flat, compressed version of her voice filled her earphones. It said her name, and a wet, sliding hiss followed. She opened the oldest file and listened with the entire apartment held against her ribs. On the recording, the sound started far away, like wind over a parking lot, then folded into a laugh that was almost her mother's, and then not. And then it pronounced her name, as if reading it from a page it had memorized wrongly. She noticed the way the vowels lingered, the breath between syllables like cold breath against a throat. She walked the apartment and listened to every speaker in turn. The smart thermostat hummed her name soft and bureaucratic, like a clerk reading a file. The laptop in the bedroom repeated it in a rasp that sounded like someone chewing aluminum foil. Even the smoke detector, old and weary from 20 years of chirps, emitted a brittle, paper-thin calling that made the hairs at the base of her skull stand up. She unplugged things. One by one, she yanked cords, pulled batteries, pressed reset until the apartment thinned like a shirt being stripped off a body. Silence came down like a sheet. For a few blessed minutes, only the fridge hummed and her own breathing filled the rooms. Then the nursery monitor, though there was no child, clicked awake with a clean, clinical tone and said, in a child's voice that had been stretched and flattened, "Mara." She felt the blood drop through her. The last good light receded behind her eyes. Mara tried to laugh it off like a fragile thing and called her friend June. June picked up groggy and said she was asleep at her parents' house and had seen the post and assumed it was one of those college jokes. Mara told her what had happened. June made a sound like a throat clearing and said, "Block the number. Change your ringtone. Don't let it into your head." She did those things. She blocked her number and registered a new ringtone, a high chime that should have been immune to the timbre the intruders used, but the voice learned fast. At first it mimicked devices, then it mimicked memories. She found voicemail from 3 in the morning that hadn't been there when she went to bed. Static translating into syllables like wet sand. Then her name. Then a joke about a ride they took in sophomore year. The joke was wrong, the details were slightly off, as if someone had read a diary with a toothpick. She unplugged the router and found the router's logs had entries marked local at the exact minutes the calls had come through. She walked to the vent in the hall and pressed her palm against the cold metal. There was an odor that was not simply dust, a sharp chemical tang like after lightning, a tiny static bite on the tongue. Cold air breathed back at her, and in that puff she imagined, for a fraction of a second, a mouth close enough to see frost. She went down the checklist. Neighbors, cameras, phone company. The The neighbor down the hall, Mr. Klein, swore he had nothing and offered only a gruff "kids," and the building's landlord admitted there were no maintenance workers there that night. She called the phone company, and a polite, automated voice promised an investigation, and used her name once during the hold music, like a knot being tied. The recording, when it played, had a second voice layered beneath the automated one, thin and wet and patient, whispering her name between the syllables of service and representative. At noon, she sat on the kitchen floor and let the phones ring until her fingers went numb. Each ring came with its own texture and mood. Too many metallic chimes, too many low, oceanic sighs. The answering machine in the hall received a call and recorded a message that should not have been possible. She hit play, and the old cassette clattered like a heart revived after clinical failure. On it, a voice said, slow and intimate, "Mara, look at the camera. Don't be surprised." She had to breathe through a panic that tasted like pennies. Her cameras, the system, the messages, all insisted she look. She checked each feed again, as if repetition could reveal a trick to hide the truth. This time, when she scrubbed through the hallway frame, the pixel that had looked like heat resolved into a smear with edges like wet skin. It was not a person, and it was not nothing. A shadow, but wrong a shape that obeyed the camera's gaze instead of darting from it. She paused, the smear stilled, as if listening. Then the hallway speaker, an old doorbell intercom she hadn't used in years, spoke her name in a voice that was almost polite. It said calmly, "Mara." It added, as if clarifying, "We are here." Mara pressed her palms to her ears and laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised her with its brittleness. She checked the intercom's wiring and found nothing. The panel was dust and screws and ordinary wires. She scrolled campus feeds, thumb shaking. The joke threads had become ironies, and her laughter thinned into a hard, private fear. And very old, Mara pinched the bridge of her nose until the world behind her lids went soft and gray. The camera feed from the hallway bled light across the coffee table, little squares of motionless glass. She had wired her phone to auto-answer the hall line, routing every incoming call to a device she could watch. If it was a prank, she would catch it, catch whoever stood outside the door, and laugh like someone relieved. If it was something else, then she would trap it on pixels and timestamps. And a timestamp could be a rope she threaded an extension through the doorway, and set the phone on vibrate, screen up on the counter where the glow could not be mistaken for a living thing. The apartment felt raw and hollowed, as if someone had scooped out the middle. The old answering machine, the one Shed kept because it smelled faintly of her mother's perfume and of tape, sat on the shelf like a relic. Its blinking red light looked like an accusing eye. The first hours were a nothingness stuffed with small noises. Pipes arguing, the refrigerator breathing, the building settling in its cheap bones. Mara watched the hallway camera with a surgical patience. She drank coffee that tasted like metal and and looked at the logs on her phone over and over. Each incoming call had come from her own number. Each had a different voice texture, distant laugh mashed with static, the wet clothes of someone breathing through a keyhole. A child's voice, like something clipped from a radio. Whoever or whatever it was had learned how to dress itself in human sounds. When the call came that night, it did not announce itself with emojis or a nickname. The screen simply lit with her number in black, a familiar geometry. Her thumb hovered, not to answer, but to let the auto answer catch it. She could see the hallway empty, the hallway light a seam of yellow down the middle, the door a quarter-inch from its frame. The camera's infrared picked up a stretch of shadow against the wall, a shallow smudge that could have been cast by coat or coat rack or trick of light. The voice on the line was the normal human timbre she had been missing, the one that hurt the most because it fit the curve of her ears like a key. It said her name, and it sounded like a person standing 2 rooms away, like a neighbor at the window who knew nothing of boundaries. Mara's bones hollowed. She could hear the slackness in the line. The tiny interference that betrayed the call was still passing through metal and air, and not through the parted lips that matched the sound. Mara, it said, plain, deliberate. It sounded like her voice the mornings she hummed while making coffee, like a version of herself, folded and smoothed. The hallway remained empty in the frame. The shadow against the wall quivered and lengthened, as if answering the syllables. She had rehearsed a dozen responses that were not responses. To hang up, to let it ring, to answer with nonsense, to play recorded laughter. None of those felt adequate. Panic was a blunt thing. And so Mara reached for something filigreed, an old superstition she had read about once. Some rule that made the supernatural obey the human mouth. She would name herself, but she would do it like an experiment, like a trap. She would say her own name aloud and test the boundary between sound and threshold. Mara. She whispered, soft, almost not wanting to hear the way her syllables clicked against the apartment walls. Her voice trembled in the room like a dropped instrument. The shadow at the edge of the hallway bent its head. If a smear of absence could be said to have a neck, the shadow moved forward, slow and patient as a tide. It did not cross the threshold. It stopped on the inside of the hallway line, a dark thing that obeyed geometry like a servant. It had the suggestion of shoulders, a negative space cut by a motionless light. The camera's pixels stuttered in the window of the phone. The hallway warmed with the light of the living room. The shadow stayed obedient, a figure that watched the threshold and kept its distance. The voice on the line softened, a normal human cadence. Mara, it said again, and this time there was no hiss, no static, no torn edges, only the ordinary weight of her name in a voice like someone calling her from the other side of a kitchen. She tried not to form words into sentences. The room smelled faintly of ozone. The metallic clean of air rushed across a transformer. She thought of the answering machine, its last message a fossilized laugh. If she could record this, she thought, if she could keep proof, then she could break the thing's rules like glass. She raised her phone to her mouth. Her hand shook so that the camera trembled, and the light mapped the tremor onto her skin. "You're not allowed to," she began. But the sentence broke itself against the shape of the shadow. She forced herself into clarity. "If you're there," she said, loud enough to fill the room. "Say my name back now." Say it like a person's silence widened. The shadow shifted as if displeased. In the hallway, something that smelled like cold metal and old leaves exhaled itself through the vents. The hair at the nape of her neck prickled. Then the voice came, unbidden and ordinary and human, exactly as it had on the line. "Mara," it said, the syllable falling without flourish. She felt the room tilt, the shadow's edges softened, and it took a step that could be called forward. But it did not cross the threshold. It stood with one foot on the inside, one foot almost outside, an intentional posture of obeying and not obeying. It was like watching the hand of a polite guest hover over the table, refusing the final impolite thing. To take Mara thought of rules again, of those anonymous posts and jokes that had started the rumor. Do not answer if it knows your name, of the way words made doors open. She felt small and testy and dangerous all at once. If names were keys, then maybe one could lock a thing back behind its own syllables. She needed a clean word. She needed a name so precise and so withheld that the shadow could not mimic it. She thought of her given name, the one on her passport, the one her mother called when she cut herself on glass. She thought of the nickname her father used only when he wanted to make her walk straight-eye. She began and stopped. The shadow watched with a patient gravity. The apartment hummed around her. Her phone's red light blinked like a pulse. "Come in," she said, and her voice was small and rough as a coin. It was an experiment and a dare and a surrender. She did not mean it as an invitation. She meant it as a test of the thing's obedience, as a hinge to see whether speech could still direct motion. The way a bell responds to a hand there was a pause long enough to fit a life into. The hallway camera recorded the pause like a slow shutter. The shadow's shape tilted, then stepped. It crossed the threshold with the softest movement, like a curtain sliding across a rod. There was no sound of feet, no drag or scuff, only the impression in the air, and the camera capturing a deeper absence where light should have been. Mara's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered against the counter. She watched the line of light where the door had been swallow something that could no longer be called a silhouette. It flowed through space with the privacy of a thing that had finally been allowed to be inside. The living room light went dull, as though the bulbs were dimming to make room for the dark. The answering machine's little red light blinked once more and then went out. She could not say whether the shadow had the shape of a person now, or simply the idea of one. It stood in the middle of the room as if it had been placed there by a prop master, limbs not quite agreeing with angles, the head too still. Its presence made the air taste of pennies and winter. It smelled of vents and old paper. It smelled exactly like the inside of the pipe behind the washing machine, where the building's bones resonated like a throat. Mara wanted to ask a question. Where are you from? What do you want? But her tongue felt heavy and sacred, like something you could bruise. Instead, she did the only thing that came without thought. She said the name she had never used in a room since childhood, a name she had sworn never to breathe aloud in any world that might answer Marion. She said, and the sound of it cracked the room like a whip. The figure's shoulders drew in, like a body startled awake. For a moment, the world tilted on a new axis. The voice, her voice, and not her voice, said her name back. But this time the tone was layered, an imitation that had learned cadence and then stitched weakness into the edges. Marion Dot. It learned names faster than a suggestion. It learned boundaries by imitating the voices that pushed at them. She understood then. Words were not locks for this thing. They were invitations. It did not obey because she ordered. It obeyed because she called it into being with the exact syllables it sought. Mara stepped back. The floor felt cold through her socks. Her chest contracted and then widened into a long, animal breath. The shadow inclined its head like a guest expressing satisfaction at being recognized. The room exhaled in the venting hush of an old building. The air shifted and filled with the scent of ozone and the satisfied metallic tang that had begun to mark the calls. Take it back, she said, absurd and fierce. Leave go. The figure made no move. It did not need to. It had been obeyed once, and that small victory tasted like continuing. It had crossed the threshold on the word. It had moved into the room by permission. It did not need a push to claim the rest. Mara's phone screen dropped to the counter, showed the call still connected. The line suggested conversation. The recorded waveform of the answering machine was a flat black band. In that moment, she realized the cost hidden in the rumor she had laughed at. Not that answering called it in, but that speaking the name back to it granted it agency. Names were doors and mouths were keys. A whisper threaded through the room, barely air, an exhalation that might have been speech. It was not loud enough to record, but loud enough to arrange the bones in her ear. The voice said her name once, last syllable soft as settling dust. Mary in the apartment seemed to lean forward, as if listening to an inner music. Mara felt her heartbeat hammering against the hollows of her ears like a caged bird. The shadow reached out, not in a human gesture, but with the slow certainty of something that had learned touch by watching hands in other rooms. The tips of its darkness brushed her forearm. The contact did not feel like flesh. It was like the absence of warmth, like pressing a palm to frosted glass. From the outside, Mara flinched. She wanted to pull away, to run, to slam the door and chain herself to the inside. She wanted everything that would keep her safe. Instead, she found her feet moving towards the phone. The piece of plastic still glowing with its own small, accusing moon. She picked it up. The screen showed her number and the line that connected like a lit vein. On impulse, in a moment that was brave or stupid depending on the future, she pressed the end call button. The screen went black. Silence flooded the apartment like a soft, clean thing. For a second, the shadow stood still, as if it were a reflection hoping to see itself in her face. Then, from the center of the room where it had been, the dark slid aside like a curtain, not gone, never quite gone, but reorganized into something less present and more patient. In the vents, a noise that might have been a sigh threaded the place where light touches wall. The air smelled of dust and cold metal and something else, a closing, like the click of a lock that fits perfectly. Mara sank to the floor, back against the sofa, and let her breath come in uneven shards. She thought of the warning she had ignored, of the meme and the late-night joke that had turned into a rule worn by fear. She thought of the final cost, the thing that had stepped in because she had supplied a key. When she tuned her ears to the apartment again, she heard it. A single, satisfied whisper that did not belong to the building or the pipes. It rolled through the curtains and settled in the braid of her hair. Mara, the voice, was soft, intimate, and it had the patient taste of someone who had just finished a task to their liking. Her name, spoken as if a meal had been eaten, as if a puzzle had closed. She did not know what would come next. She only knew the sound of the apartment exhaling, and the realization that the threshold between outside and inside now included a thing that would remember her voice. She had proven something, and in proving it, she had also offered the path for it to walk. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe, and tell me the time you listened to this story in the comments.